Hey, everybody, this is Al. This is Philadelphia, the Kelly Writers House at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, PA, USA. We're so glad that people are joining us. This is a good time for a lot of people in lots of parts of the world. So that in Oceania, in East Asia, it's around midnight. So we can sort of catch them there, which is great. On the West Coast, it's West Coast of the U.S., it's 9 a.m. So this is, and in Europe, it's the end of the afternoon. You're popping open a bottle of sherry if you're north, and a bottle of Bordeaux if you're south, and okay, whatever, Chianti if you're really south. And it's 6 o'clock or 7, so this is really prime time. So we're happy to have everybody here. I have a couple of announcements at the beginning, but I want to say hello to everybody. So we have a bunch of students and teachers from Lower Moreland School. So Zach, can you do your camera magic? And there they are. There they are. Hi, everybody. Aww. Thank you so much for coming. We might have some questions for you about, like, what the hell are you doing? Really? You're doing ModPo? Is it fun? Are you scared? We don't look scary, do we? We do. We're scary. Okay. Anyway, so thank you guys for coming. We have Gabe here. Hello, Gabe.
Hi, Al. How are you?
You know, the first caller is going to get a copy of Gabe's really great first book. And I say first book because the Jazzercise book is out, and there's other.
It's coming soon.
It's coming soon.
That's such
but
a great
this
cover.
is a book that you can have. I think it's great. I have, my little stash of copies of it that I dole out to people I really like. Or random callers, random ModPo callers. So Gabe's a very talented poet. We're
Thank you,
happy to have you. Davey, hello.
Good morning, Al.
I love the way you do this dramatic, like I'm sitting way back, but there's something.
Look at this tiny scrap of table space we've given to
I'm
Davey.
fine.
Davey compensates.
Yeah, I take up adequate space when it's necessary.
Hello, Davey.
Did you have a good Halloween, Al?
Oh, I ducked it.
Oh,
I ducked it. My kids, we used to do a big thing, and on Osage Avenue, which is here in West Philadelphia, I've always been dedicated to being there. And the kids are 4 deep, and there's carloads of people coming to the neighborhood. Yeah. And I got home, and I thought, I can't. I turned all the lights off. I turned all the lights off, and I sat in my study with one light on my crappy work and the university stuff, and the kids, I heard the delightful screams of kids downstairs, and I started to cry, and it just, so thanks a lot.
Thanks for asking, Davey.
Wow. It's just because I want
TMI. You just asked like a routine, boring question.
I want you to have fun, Al.
I'm not having fun except this. This is great. I really am. Anna's sort of falling over now. This is what happens when mid ModPo Al gets a little sleepless. And Lily Applebaum. Hello, Lily.
Hello.
How are you?
Good.
Amber Rose Johnson, good to see you.
Hi, Al.
Hey. And Ron Silliman, thank you so much for joining us, a Week 8 poet himself.
A Week 8 poet. That's W-E-A-K, 8 poet.
Okay. So glad you joined us. Erica Kaufman in the Mid-Hudson Valley. Hello.
Hi, Al.
How are you?
Everyone. Hi, Ron.
You seem kind of chipper today. Something going on in the coffee?
I've had a lot of it.
Okay. This is what's happening to everybody. Hey, no coffee. It's really not good for you, despite what we say. Joe Massey is in the valley. What's the name of your valley? Pioneer Valley, with his Halloween hat, and it's also starting to be, kind of feel like November up there.
It's cold. It's very cold.
Yeah. Well, it's great to see you, Joe. And we have Dave Poplar there from
Good morning.
A warmer clime. Hey, Dave. Just a couple of announcements. First, the phone number this time, we revert to the old phone. And I'll say why, too, because we had gone to was it a Skype-based thing? We went to a Skype-based phone thing, which made everything good, except that who owns Skype? Must be Microsoft bought Skype, and then Microsoft released one of their imponderable updates, and now it doesn't work for us, of course. So we went back to what's called POTS line, plain old telephone service, POTS. No, really, that's what they called it. AT&T guys say, You want a POTS line? Yeah, POTS, plain old telephone service. It's actually a phone, and the number is 215-573-9752, 215-573-9752. Davey's taking notes. Like, when you hang around the old guy, you learn things like that.
It's actually a phone, Al.
It's actually a phone. Okay. I wanted to say thank you again to Ron and note that Ron has entered the discussion forums this week, and he's been involved in at least 2 threads. They're easy to find. You can just sort of use the search box to type in Silliman, or you can there's one with his name on it, and it's been a lot of fun. I hope you'll join him. I just want to shout out a couple of threads. Lori Olewinstein, who's a longtime ModPoer in Los Angeles, and Erica Kaufman. They've been talking a lot with a lot of other people about teaching Eileen Miles Snakes, which is a poem we talked about last week or referred to, and that thread is called Returning in Miles Snakes. It's really good. I recommend it. The Bringing Texas Round the Bend gang, which is Texans plus ModPo Texans plus anybody else. That's how open-hearted the Texans are. Bringing Texas Around the Bend, week 8. They're having this ongoing conversation about Larry Eigner's Bookshelf, which is a ModPo Plus poem. And I brought a printout of it. Maybe we'll talk about it. It's really great. Maybe we won't. It's definitely to be seen. There's a year-old conversation about My Life Had Stood a Loaded Gun, which is the poem that is a key to Susan Howe's book length. It's really kind of, among many other things, a kind of extended close reading of that amazing poem, which is, I think there's some rumor that Lily and a band of merry prankster ModPoers are going to do a video that's somehow based on the, others. Are we revealing that? Anyway, My Life Had Stood a Loaded Gun is a poem that we could do much more with, and maybe we will. Let's just put it that way. And it's the basis of what Susan Howe is doing, and there is a thread that's a year old that got revived. It's called Loaded Gun as the Instrument of Will. And to revive any thread from the previous year, even though you may be a new ModPo person, go back and find something using the search box, and you could find an old discussion, and there's a good chance that about 40 or 50% of the people who are in the old thread will still be around. So if you post something new, 2 things happen. 1, everybody who gets notifications about new contributions to a thread to which they're subscribed will get an email, and so if they're still in the course, they'll get a notification that it's been revived. And second, it'll pop up to the top of the thread list. The default setting for the thread view of the discussion forum is most recent. And if you go to most recent, which is the default, so you don't have to go to it, and you go to threads, if someone has revived something a year old, it will come to the top. Okay? And the last thing is that, once again, Jake Marmer's office hour got crashed by a bunch of people. I saw them organizing in another thread. Let's go to Jake's office hour. And then they wound up doing a close reading of a poem. And I'm just going to recommend that to any of the TAs. If you can instigate some people to crash your thread for the office hour, that would be great. Okay. So what I wanted to start with was, since Ron is here, Joshua Seguin has been writing about Albany, right? So he wrote a couple of days ago, I'm listening to it now, my third exposure, if you will, ModPo person reciting it. My mind is blown. I understand the entire course after doing the Albany thing. I understand the entire course and almost the entire origin, state, and direction of poetry right now. Sorry if this is short, but there isn't anything else to say. So I said, well, please say more. One of my kind of weak pedagogical things is say more. So Joshua Seguin said more, and I'll say a couple of things of what he says, and then I'm going to turn to Ron and everybody to respond. We're talking about Albany, which is 100 sentences. The rule was for Ron that each one had to be both saying something political and saying something personal, each one. And there's much more to say about Albany. Okay, so Joshua Seguin wrote and said, this is all an impression, but there's something very poetry specific about this piece. I feel like this poem and its premise amount, in my mind, to the exact thing that both Whitman and Dickinson were doing or trying to do. Whitman being concerned with the processes outside of the mind, externalities, experience, and Dickinson, of course, famously within. The poem Albany is the result of 100 years of he's being waxing poetic here. The result of 100 years of trial and error in the poetic efforts to reconcile the two spheres that were dissociated at the end of the Victorian age, the self and others. It's a really interesting comment. Skipping, there is no narrative, or rather the narrative is the cloud of ideas itself, lack of structure. Silliman is expressing himself, but not enough to make the poem about him. There is no conclusion to be taken from it because it is just what it is, 5 minutes of present and urgent poetry. It is planned, but planned in a way that 21st century people will find appealing. It's there and then it's not there, therefore it will remain in our minds. This is the poetry that poetry needs. Thank you, Joshua. And Ron, why don't we turn to you to react to any of that praise? I'm sure you're blushing inside, if not outside.
Well, it all pleases me. Although
I've always seen a lot of Walt and Emily in you.
Huh? Yeah. Well, I have often felt that poor Emily got kidnapped by the wrong group of folks around Amherst, when in fact she's a far more radical poet than she is often given credit for. And one of the very great things about the work of Susan Howe is going back to the actual texts and pulling that out, and just to acknowledge that the dashes and the gaps and the strange punctuations all have meaning suddenly transforms Emily Dickinson dramatically from the person who, when I was an undergraduate, a career I never finished, the joke was that you could read all of her work to the tune of The Yellow Rose of Texas.
Because it was forced into a ballad stanza.
And that, in fact, actually is not true if you're really reading Emily Dickinson, which Susan Howe does. It reminds me of that so often we think we know things about works that, in fact, we don't really know all that much about. Charles Olson in the 1930s, when he was a student, wrote a text about Moby Dick called Call Me Ishmael that could be reduced to the single observation that Melville was reading Shakespeare when he wrote Moby Dick. And that seems totally 100% obvious in 2017. In 1939, that was a career-making observation because, nobody had noticed that.
Yeah. Ron, you beautifully dodged, because I threw in the Whitman and Dickinson stuff, and you went off on Dickinson. So what I'm going to do is turn to your friends, colleagues, and readers around the table to say anything in response to Joshua Seguin's idea, I think a productive idea, that you can take one of these poems. I think a number of them work that way. I think My Life works that way. I think Sleeping with the Dictionary works that way, where you just think, this is where this thinking we've been doing in this course leads. Of course it leads because we've set up the syllabus to lead, but still, aside from that obvious observation, let's turn to somebody to say something in response to what Josh Seguin said. Joe Massey, when you heard me reading Josh Seguin, I understand you don't have the text in front of you, what were you thinking?
I was thinking it was first off a terrific comment, and it makes sense to me to read Albany as both Whitmanian and Dickinsonian, but on the level of form, because Albany both expands Whitmanically, you could say, and contracts, you could say, like Dickinson, and it's all done with syntax. Within there are no line breaks, so it's all syntax. And
that's right. That's great. Dave Poplar or Erica Kaufman, I want to press on this idea that Joshua had in there that we can take one of these poems, and Silliman's Albany is the one we've taken in this instance. We can take one of these poems and get so excited about it as a perfect instance of what we want poetry to be doing. To the extent that we say that's true, because Ron's here, we don't want to just trash the poem. We want to assume that it's a great poem, which is what Joshua Seguin is assuming, and say something about what it's like to read a poem and realize this is what poetry should do. Erica, any thought on that? What is it that you want your poetry to do? And all the coffee in the world is not going to make that an easy question to answer.
Yeah, that's a really hard question, and it's an interesting question looking at Albany, which, I'm just always struck with Albany, as I think Joe is alluding to, the concision of how sentences are crafted, and they're not, a lot of them aren't long sentences, so there's this great attention, which is very different from Whitman, I think. There's this attention to each single word and how the words are kind of working as a team together to project meaning that's at once personal and political.
Yeah. I want to point out, because I forgot to do that earlier when I was rapidly introducing, Jason is here and he's got the portable mic. So, there's a chance that the students will get a mic handed to them. And Anna Strong-Safford is here. Hello, Anna. And I always neglect to say until the end that Zach and Chris, who set this thing up in 2 hours, deserve all the credit in the world for making this incredibly sharp video and all the interaction possible. 215-573-9752. What I want to do now is I want to read the list of poems in the main syllabus so that we have them. It's just wide open, and then just take a poll around the table. What is it that you want to talk about? And I'm sure that we can get some response from the Twitter feed, which would be hashtag ModPo Live, and also the forum. And I think Davey's looking at the forum. So let's just sort of take a consensus of where people are at. So Silliman's Albany is first. 4 sections of Lynn Haginian's classic My Life, which I think if you're trying to, between Albany and My Life, if you're trying to define or sort of set out some operating principles of the so-called language poetry school. On the alternative experimental autobiography side, those 2 texts really do a great job. One of the reasons why they're taught so much. Bob Perlman's Chronic Meanings, which disrupts elegy, disrupts the line. Charles Bernstein's pretty uncharacteristic of Bernstein, but a compelling post-9/11, the ground has shifted poem. In a restless world like this is. Susan Howe's absolutely stunning My Emily Dickinson. We have 2 excerpts from that. Ron Silliman's Bart, which is 1 sentence written on Labor Day 1976 as Ron, the person sitting here, traveled the Bay Area Rapid Transit System. You were about to say something.
That's essentially a 1-line poem, but it's my most Whitmanian line.
All right, there you go. That is a long line. And Harriet Mullen's amazing Sleeping with the Dictionary, and we have 2 poems from that. One is the title poem, which is very languagey in a way, or that is, it fits a week 8 very well. And the other is a list poem, which seems to be looking forward to, or either it partly participates in the listiness of New York school and then moves forward to other kinds of forms, but also Sleeping with the Dictionary. And I would just add the Larry Eigner poem, Bookshelf, if anybody's interested in that. So why don't we first we'll turn to Davey. What's happening in the forums? We have a phone call. There's any way we can go. And Anna, it wasn't? Okay.
There are a couple of great questions about Albany. There's a question about the relationship between personal and political in O'Hara versus Silliman. And there's a really great question about Sleeping with the Dictionary that brings up some of the major issues in thinking about the relationship between non-representational language as kind of elitist and language poetry is interested in being democratic, that gets to the heart of the conversations that these poems are having together. So that would be a cool one.
Is that question about Mullen?
That question's about Mullen specifically, yeah.
Okay. Is it the Sleeping with the Dictionary prose poem, or is it the list poem?
It is about Sleeping with the Dictionary generally, so I think we can go either way.
Okay. Would that be good if we went to that one? Joe, nod yes, that's good. If we do the Mullen. Okay. Do you want to extract from the question, and then we'll just see how everybody's doing?
The question does a great job of framing dictionary as a word that is interested in observation, examination, systematization, but also loss, and thinking about what gets to be included and what's excluded. That a dictionary has the allure of being comprehensive but can't ever be. And the final sentence of this question is, do we have a sort of controversy between the democratization of language and poetry and the deepest elitist sense of poetry as a particularly different language?
Okay,
And that
great.
seems to be the heart of it.
Fantastic. Okay, why don't we get some responses to that? Gabe, you don't look like you have a specific. Okay, Lily, do you want to just throw an idea out there and then we can go on?
Yeah, actually, I've been thinking a lot about what Anna said, I think at the end of the last webcast, actually in reference to Bernadette Mayer's experiments, maybe, but she talked about the gesture of making a list of experiments as something really incredibly generous on the part of an artist to make their creative act something other people can then do themselves and participate in. And so I think that key of like creating a form and a work of art that makes you read it and think like I could turn around and do this, like it's so easy, but more just like this is something I could do too, and that's really like exciting. And so,
And you're in particular thinking of this generative poem.
the Any Lit poem from
you are a U-boat beyond
Sleeping
my
with the
mind
Dictionary.
control.
Yeah.
You are a euthanasia beyond my miasma. You are an etc.
Yeah, so maybe a bridge between the like elitism and the democracy is like there's an elitism of whose language gets encoded into the dictionary, but then there's a democratic approach of like we can create a form where anyone can pick up these tools that enclose elitism around
Right.
them and make something
Right.
with them.
No, that's a great way to start, and we'll go to Jason next. But Jason, I just want to tee this off by saying that the language poets, almost all of them, are really, really focused on how writing can be done by, I don't want to say anyone, but certainly more feeling that more than the modernists who kind of believed in genius and so forth. So I think of Ron taking his pen on it was free or half price that day. I think it was free.
I think 25 cents.
So it was cheaper because it was Labor Day, and there was greater class mix and ethnic mix, and than you would see on the normal day, presumably. And you're going through different neighborhoods, and he's writing, and basically in that kind of enabling sense of Bernadette, write whatever you see. You have Lynn
Freaking
Haginian.
out passengers who have no idea what I'm doing.
Yes, as you're falling over. Or Lynn Haginian in a slightly more difficult mode of trying to remember memories prior to memory. And it's very hard to read those first chapters of my life without thinking, oh, I know what it's like to try to remember the childhood memories before the memory and to think about how you got these memories because your parents kept telling you stories, and realizing that as a child, you get languaged by the language around you. All that thing that's so common to everyone that's very different from the genius approach. Anyway, so I think there's an effort to democratize across the board here. Jason, say whatever you want to say. Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm pretty good. I
Good.
feel like we're echoing
Yeah.
purples.
I don't have that great inside. What are you doing with that fabulous inside?
I've become obsessed with...
It's paisley, I think.
I've become obsessed with English laundry shirts. That's the...
Oh, nice. That's a beautiful
That's the
shirt.
brand. And they always have... They have... I've been spending all my dissertation award winnings buying these shirts.
Wow. So
Really?
the dissertation gets stretched out a little longer because of that.
I'm wearing it. But
These students are never going to become grad students, except if you want to wear a nice
if
shirt.
you're thinking about it, talk to me. Davey, could you reread some of the question that uses the word democracy and language within
I think
language?
it was at the end.
Yeah, so that final sentence is, do we have a sort of controversy between the democratization of language and poetry and the deepest elitist sense of poetry as a particularly different language?
Right.
Wow.
I hear that as a question between syntax and word choice in a really basic kind of way. And if you look at the poem by Harriet, there are these places in the poem where you can put in the U-sounding word or the M-sounding word. And you can put in anything.
Which is
But
what
there-
Lily was saying.
Right, and
Generative
behind
quality of
it, there is this structure. And as you read more and more of it, that structure becomes apparent and even becomes foregrounded. And I could
Definitely.
see somebody saying that there was a tension there. I mean, I don't hear that. I think both sides of those are open to the democratic impulse. That's not a particularly difficult sentence structure overall, but through that constant repetition, it sort of rises up and it, ends up looking a lot like what Duncan refers syntax to as, the lion of his unconscious life.
Jason, will you finish the thought? And then I think Amber Rose has a comment she wants to make.
I guess what I'd like everyone who's watching or listening or who's in the room to just think about our kind of intuitive or like reflexive notions of what we feel when we say democracy or elitism, and what is, I mean, do we know what we're saying really when we talk about a democratic impulse? And maybe the political charge of Ron's poems, I think, matters in thinking about the premise of the democracy is a citizenship that not necessarily shares the exact same language, because if the citizenry shared a language defined by the dictionary alone and not supplemented by streams of experience feeding into the language. And we need to remember that democracy is supposed to function through a different kind of language other than poetry, perhaps. Basically, journalism and reportage, and for people to be able to read about different issues and then make decisions based on their based on the shared knowledge they gain through this kind of the objective distribution of information about governance and political issues.
Oh, that objective distribution.
Yeah, which
sounds like a dream.
Well, it's a terrifying dream, I think, because we're everyone. So for the students here in the room, think if when you were in your crib, your parents took away your little blankie or your teddy bear and put in a big dictionary and said, "You're not getting out of this crib until you memorize this." And oh my God. We will only communicate with each other using the predetermined meanings of all these words. That would be terrifying. There would be...
It would be terrifying. And I want to interrupt.
Go for it.
Just to say a follow-up thing, and then turn to Amber Rose. If I can't imagine a better definition of the kind of poetry that the ModPo, the implied idea of ModPo through the syllabus and through its interest in experimentation. God, I forgot where that sentence is going. But I can't imagine a better way to imagine where this thing is going than to say that if the dictionary determines the poetry that at least I admire breaks down, resists the determination, fools around with it, does what the title poem, Sleeping with the Dictionary, does it by torquing it, eroticizing it, making fun of our attraction to it and our obsession with it. And I think the poems that I admire most in ModPo, such as this one, basically say that crib scene is a nightmare, and let's find a poetry that's alternate. And the other thing that I want to say democracy is it is what a community of interpreters does when it's faced with a difficult poem rather than one that's done all the work for you, like a dictionary. And then we have to reckon with it, do the work, as Anna always says. We have to do the work. And parataxis is a way of, for Lynn Haginian, for instance, to induce us into doing the work of putting the things together such that we have to collaborate on, we become co-creators of meaning, and that co-creation is a democratic thing, even if the writer was elitist, or even if the writing could be interpreted by an elitist as a predetermined and objective delivery of meaning. If we democratize our interpretation, which is the mode and pedagogy of this thing we're trying to do, then we are democratizing something that might resist it. I'm sorry for that little speechlet, but I want to turn to Amber Rose, who had a thought maybe about 10 minutes ago. Do you still have it?
Not as much, but what I will say, maybe just in response to your last comment, Al, I really appreciate that, and I agree that a lot of the democracy comes in interpretation and in recognizing that different interpretations can exist. So even if we sit at this table and we collaboratively come up with one interpretation, another group of people could sit at a table and come up with something totally different. And I think part of democratizing, just looking specifically at this list poem, is about dispelling a kind of elitism that kind of couches how we approach poetry, even if a particular poem or poet is not elitist. So poetry becomes this like really inaccessible thing. But just bringing it into your hands and saying, I'm going to look at this poem and I'm going to read it. I'm going to tear down some of the kind of, some of the like great mask. I'm thinking of, okay, that's a tangent. Like the mask of poetry, that it's this really big elitist thing, no matter who's writing it, is really powerful. So even looking at any lit, like I'm looking at some of these lines, you are a eureka beyond my Mai Tai. Like you could read that poem.
Urethra.
A eureka. Yeah.
I'm sorry, you're reading a different line. Sorry. Sorry.
Urethra is...
No, it's a different line.
Different
line.
You are eureka beyond my Mai Tai. There's a way that you could read that and think like, oh, I don't understand this because it's bigger than me, or she's smarter than me, or she's doing something really complicated, as opposed to being like, she might have just chose Mai Tai. She might have just chose Eureka, and so is doing something with the randomness of those words, and by exposing that, that's how you can undermine the elitism.
Quick. It's going to have to be quick.
Yeah, super quick.
You quick, because we have someone on the phone.
Okay. Instead of thinking of a poem like this as elitist, we could think of it as profoundly democratic in terms of the way it's using language that any reader of English can read, but that doesn't foreclose what that reader can think or do. So so rather than, I think that many readers are so accustomed to having language be a transparent vehicle for information that they want, rather than a poem like this, which is not a vehicle for information. It is a opportunity for creative play and collaboration.
I just want to put in a plug for week 9. A lot of people get turned off by week 9, or they're confused by the quasi non-intentional. But what Amber Rose said, and you just now, basically leads us there. If we push this process of not randomizing, but in the case of this, but Mai Tai. How did she get Mai Tai? Well, it might as well have been just one of the M words that she had on her list, and she thought, oh, that'll go there. The Week 9 poets push this to an extreme by trying to get us to see that really everybody can do this because they've got a computer program that will do it. It turns a lot of people off because they felt that ModPo was holding on to a vestige of subjective lyricism and of will, of intention. And Week 9 is so threatening to some people because Jackson McClough, if you went up to him and said, that was a really good poem, he'd say, well, I didn't make that poem, which is not true, but it was a kind of rhetorical gesture on his part. So yay, Week 9, I hope you'll stay with us. Gabe, quickly, and then the phone call. We'll see. And then I want to get Dave Poplar in on the conversation because he hasn't had a chance yet. So
it'll be quick, I promise. So for me, I have some problems with the premise here because this idea that poetry as a different language is elitist, that idea, it comes to me from the Western school system, which teaches you sometimes until you graduate from high school, sometimes further when you graduate from college, that a poem is better than you, that you need to figure it out, that you have to work on it. What can you get out of this poem? Which is really not how poems interact with us in our daily lives. And the first person to teach that to me was Charles Bernstein, who really believes and practices in his classes that your analysis of a poem can come from taking it, changing the words, and seeing what it looks like now that you played with it. And
which he
that
calls
kind of
reading sometimes.
Yeah, with a W.
WREADING. It's kind of a stupid little
it's
clever
a little
thing, but when you first hear it, it's pretty good, right?
And so the thing is that
kneading bread.
That's an idea that poetry and analysis comes through interaction between the text and a person or a community of people in our case. And so that to me is not an issue of is it democratic or is it elitist? That's a just completely different set of questions. And with Mullen specifically, I don't think she's wondering if language is democratic or elitist or if poetry is democratic or elitist. I think she's making through lines in weight of words, as she says, the weight of meanings here, and seeing what she can make out of those through lines. That's what that poem is, the Eureka Mai Tai, Urethra Mitsubishi, whatever. So that's my thought.
Right. It's a good one. I heard some snapping over here. Yeah. Can you just say what made you snap, and then we'll go to the phone call?
Everything Gabe just said.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
I mean, I really think that what we're doing is getting very excited about the communitarian or pedagogical, at least, implications of this. It seems to me that the poems that we're talking about here have to come along with a certain kind of community or collaborative reading, which sometimes has in classrooms, not often enough, and oftentimes happens in coffee shops and hangouts and places where people gather just to be free, like our meetups. I really stand behind the ModPo idea, which we stumbled into, that these poems as poems can be liberated into a space where people bring whatever they want to bring to it. Ron has something quick. It's got to be quick because we're still getting to this phone call.
I just want to note that Jason's example of the crib and the dictionary is exactly the real-life experience of Malcolm X, whose crib was in fact a prison cell, but who used the dictionary very politically while he was in there to transform first himself and then the world.
Yes. And there's a tradition of that, of course, because Douglass enabled himself to teach himself to write, right? And that became something that he could do and turn the whole language around, but you had to do that first. Okay, Anna, who is on the phone?
Well, if she's still there and hasn't dropped dead from waiting.
Oh, Anna, I thought that. I just have to, that this was a really good conversation.
It was, and she wanted to weigh in. So This is Barb. She's calling from Ithaca.
Barb from Ithaca. Yeah. Okay, let's bring her up in the old-fashioned way, Chris.
On the pots.
On the pots. You like this? Do you have a pots at home?
No, but I remember the number for my home phone, my childhood phone, and it's a very
connected?
warming.
Or is it gone? So say
damn.
it. Say it.
274-7611. Shout out to Woodbine Street. Shout out Providence. Yeah, I'm gonna cry.
You're gonna cry. Oh, those numbers. The pots.
Okay, please, Barb on the phone.
Barb.
Please, Barb.
Barb, can you hear us?
Yes. I'm
Hi.
having a problem in that I'm hearing two podcasts superimposed.
Oh, I know why. You have to turn your computer down now that you're talking to me.
Okay, so I'll turn my computer down.
This is an old radio thing.
Yeah, so I just want to complicate.
Wait a minute, Barbara, hold on.
Oh,
You're going to get a copy of Gabe's poems.
It's pretty good.
Do you want them?
Of course.
Okay, good. Are you okay if Gabe inscribes it? Because it will increase the value, which for you is going to be exponential because it's free for you. But
It's wonderful.
Okay, good.
I'm thrilled.
Are you okay telling us your last name? You don't have to, but I want to know if
Yeah, Reagan-Span. I'm unfortunately a bad student of ModPo.
Wait a minute. What does that? How could you be a bad student? It's free, open, ongoing, and non-credit. How could you be bad?
My life gets busy and I drop out. And I had promised Erica to be useful around the teaching stuff, and I haven't been. I go in and out. But I'm
Okay,
very
Erica's
coddled.
frowning. Erica's frowning.
Okay.
Okay, Barb.
Hi, Erica.
Hi.
So you're a teacher?
Yeah, I'm a retired professor in educational studies, where I worked in social justice focused teacher education in history and English, and so now I'm teaching very resistant teenagers, many of them fragile, some of them living in poverty, a lot of them having experienced violence, and in a small charter school. And I'm coming up against these issues about elitism versus democracy in ways that are throwing me back into my original structuralist leanings. In other words, I think about Marx and the belief that all culture is bourgeois culture, and that there's no way for the working class to avoid a conventional bourgeois education in order to move beyond it. And so what's troubling me right now is that we're in an era where conventional bourgeois education has been reduced so abysmally, and it's leaving out everything brilliant and exciting about ModPo, and it's completely marginalizing these wonderful experiences of co-creating, co-creation. And I meet up with these kids now who are trapped in both the conventional ways that Marx was referring to, of having been deprived of the beauty and strength of a conventional bourgeois education, but also not having faith in the more experimental, not believing in it, because it feels too cheap to them, because they associate it with the fact that there has not been any of the political change that would have changed their lives for the better.
Right. Barbara,
I'll
that
leave
was
it there. I think I've opened up stuff. So.
such a brilliant comment and so compelling. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Jason to get Annie the mic as a teacher. I won't make you talk first, but give you a chance to think. And I want to ask Erica, Amber Rose, and Davey to say something each briefly about what Barbara just said. Barbara, would you mind hanging up and listening, then turn your computer back up and listening to the response that we give?
No, I'd love that. That's
okay,
great.
Thank you so much for
Okay.
calling, and
Okay,
good luck
take
with your
care.
work.
Yeah,
really.
thank you. Bye.
Okay. All right, so the phone is free, 215-573-9752. So, Erica, do you want to start? Are you ready to start? Because Amber Rose seems to be ready.
I would like to just think a little more.
Say that again? Sure. Think a little more. Okay. Amber Rose, you're ready to say something in response?
Yeah, I just have a brief comment, and it goes back to why I was snapping when Gabe was speaking, and Gabe said that the poem Harriet Mullen, and in general, is not concerned with whether poetry is democratic or elitist. And I think that's really important, because sometimes we can talk about what we're doing up here as democratic or revolutionary, or we're doing this or we're doing that, but it is always elitist. Like it is elitist because of exactly what she's saying, like the entire kind of education system that we're embedded in. And so it can be misleading and harmful to kind of say that what we're doing is totally democratic, because that avoids the elitism that we can't get away from. Yeah, I don't know. There might be another thread to that, but I'll... Okay.
Davey, then Erica?
Yeah, I'd like to follow that to bring us back within this conversation about democracy versus elitism to what I understand to, and Ron, you can corroborate this, to be the original ideological underpinnings of language poetry. Like the thing language poetry is designed to do, whether or not it's successful, is to push against language as a commodity, to say that these are forms of language that are designed to turn you into a form of producing capital, to make you feel like you need to earn more money, to make you feel like you need to spend more money, and to make you realize that the language that you feel like you need to use is language that other people are using to use you to make more money. This is post-suburbanization. This is
It's also post-Vietnam.
Sure, this is post-Vietnam. This is in
Or
a...
actually in Vietnam. I
Sure.
actually think the language of the Vietnam conflict goes directly to the origins of language poetry.
The reaction that you lefties had in the West Coast and to some degree in New York to the kind of rhetoric that William Westmoreland was using, fundamental
We have to
to the
destroy
origins
the
of
village
language.
in order to save
That's
it.
right, right.
That kind of,
Yes.
of logic.
Ginian has written brilliantly about this in her big book of essays, The Language of Inquiry. And you've written a little bit about it in Under Albany, which is a kind of close reading. Oh, you've got it.
I have.
Zach, can we get that? This is still in print, so you can get it.
It's a POD, so anytime you order it, they'll.
So this
print
is
it.
kind of like a close reading of every sentence of Albany.
In essence, yes. They in theory, it's also an autobiography. So it approaches the personal a lot, but talks about the political.
Yeah, and you'll get a lot of that.
Saltpublishing.com.
Cool. Erica, do you want to say something about this topic?
I do. I'm hearing an echo, and I'm a little bit worried about that. Are you
No, we're
hearing it
fine.
too?
We're fine. So, Zach, do you want to suggest something for her? Maybe while you're talking, turn your own computer down.
Okay.
That might be the wrong thing to do.
So, I mean, obviously, this is a topic that I think a lot about, the idea of, thinking about what we're doing and also thinking about social justice, education, and, a lot of how I've come to think about pedagogy and poetics is involved with the idea that literacy is power. So I think that, one of the things that is interesting to me about ModPo is that while you can't escape the fact that there is elitism, we're also in a project of providing access and kind of democratizing the availability of certain kinds of texts as models used to think about how the way that we use language can be changed by being exposed to these different kinds of experimental writing.
Yes, I think an important point. And when the massive open online course became possible as a kind of primitive way of technologically distributing materials and conversation, we thought this was a good opportunity to use the elite institution and the privilege of our having the time to build up these resources as a chance to kind of create a hedge against that inherent elitism of being paid a salary to teach at an Ivy League school and teaching pretty much only the students who could possibly enroll in your class, and therefore having some limits, even given the university's longing for greater diversity, obviously has tremendous limitations in its sincerity about that or its ability to accomplish that goal. It's a mild way of putting it, but and then ModPo comes around as a free, open, non-credit course that distributes widely. Then we have a whole problem of what kind of person can get the leisure to do the 6 or 8 or 10 hours of work each week to keep up, or to get the broadband enough wherever they are, although it's a little easier now than it was. So there are all kinds of limitations of that gesture. But I really think that Erica's right about the fact that not only are we teaching widely across generations and geographies, we're also hearing from people who have different approaches culturally and otherwise. And the interpretation of someone like Dickinson widens and widens and widens and widens. And it makes us, the only reason we're still doing it after all these years, because it's interesting to have more and more people. Anyway, Annie, so you're a teacher, and you've been teaching this material.
Yes, I have.
Can you put the
And-
mic right up to you?
Yeah, sure. And I think what makes me so excited about this ModPo class it does have to do with kind of the ideas like the pedagogy of the oppressed, the ideas of constructive classrooms where the students are actually coming up with the answers.
You're a public high school teacher, and you referred to Paulo Freire.
Yes.
Do you think your principal is watching?
I lived at the Catholic Worker for years, so I come from.
Wow.
So yeah, so this excites me as much as some of those ideas excite me.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Can you hand the mic to the most loquacious or boldest of your students? Oh, look at that. Hi. How are you?
Hi.
What's your name?
Marley.
Do you want to say anything about, how much have you guys been exposed to the ModPo community? Do you go into the forums?
I do. I don't really write, though.
Yeah, but that's okay. Who do you see there? Does that make you think that this idea, you came to school, I'm going to teach, there's a poetry unit, and then suddenly there's thousands of people around the world interested. Does that hearten you?
Definitely.
What's your name?
Marley.
Marley, you told me already. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's definitely encouraging because I disagree that language is either inherently elitist or democratic. I think it comes from a lot of what you said, strands of experience, and that it's something personal that we like to pretend is more universal than it is. But I think the only thing we really can democratize, or conversely elitize, is the context. So it's heartening that there are more people with access to the internet and courses like this that can kind of create opportunity for more advocacy as a reader and hopefully as a writer if they are disappointed with what they're reading.
Wow. I have one more question for you. How, if at all, has this changed your way to read poems or the way to come to class thinking you're going to talk about poems? Has it altered that at all?
Well, I think it has definitely given me more confidence that what I bring to a poem is just as important as what the author brings to a poem.
Wow. And that is what Ron and his colleagues actually were hoping for, which is a very radical thing, I think. Wow. And your teacher is not burning a hole in the back of your head with her eyes. She's actually heartened and happy. So can we snap for Marley? Thank you. We have a phone call. Let's see where it takes us. And I want to go to Dave Poplar and Joe during this round.
We've got a dear old pal, Shannon Ratliff, calling us from
Shannon
Texas.
from Texas.
She wants to weigh in. I think she wants to return to Sleeping with the Dictionary, but maybe that'll open up some new possibilities for, talking about more of these week 8 poems.
Okay. Hi, Shannon.
Hi, Al. How you do?
Just great. Just great. You've been tweeting today.
I did twit today.
You say, Potts, I still remember my childhood number from the 60s, 270-2568.
That's right.
I noticed you didn't give us the area code.
Oh, sorry.
Don't.
I hope it's okay. I just want to say a few things about a dictionary, if we can still talk about that.
Sure. I'm kind of hoping we're going to move on to other things, but I think this is a really, really rich conversation. So please.
Okay, I'll go super fast. Okay, first I want to say, last time we talked, right after I talked to you guys, then I had a small TIA, so that's why I've not been...
Are you feeling okay?
On the forums. I'm fine. It's just stupid. But in the process of doing all that, I've been doing a big thing, and I actually used ModPo and this particular poem in my essay for my application to go back to school.
Wow, Shannon. Well, wait. That just ran by me. What are you going to do?
I've been accepted, to go back to school
Wow.
And I know this like such a big deal.
Think about where we were 6 years ago when we first started to talk with you.
It's kind of a miracle, actually. It's like a universe thing. But
What's your
so,
daughter
yeah.
say about this?
Oh, they're so excited.
Yeah.
So I've been accepted at TW, Texas Women's University.
Yep. Congratulations. Wait a minute. Let us snap for you, Shannon.
Oh,
That's so.
thanks,
We totally
guys.
believe in you. And by the way, if you ever want to have us, kind of look over your papers and stuff, Gabe would be willing to edit. Gabe would be willing to edit your
That's
papers.
very sweet.
He's got nothing to do most of the time.
So I used this poem in my essay, and I got called.
In your application essay, you used Sleeping with the Dictionary?
Yeah.
Damn, you're such a rad. That's so great. I can't. They took you? What? Wait, what's the name of the school?
At Texas Women's University.
Wow, look that up, Davey.
And I got a phone call from the dean of the degree program that I applied for, and he say, "Hey, can you come in and talk to me?"
Whoa, you thought that was bad, probably.
Yes, I thought, "Oh shit, sorry." I say,
The students here have never heard the S word.
I said, "Oh, I probably did a bad thing." So I went up there, and we had this really long conversation. Then he introduced me to a lady, one of his other professors. Anyway, long story short, they were flipping out and asked me all about ModPo.
Really?
And so I was telling them. Then after I got accepted at my last meeting, which was Monday, 2 days ago, they are helping me do my schedule. So now they both decide they're going to be my advisors.
Oh.
And he went to Harvard and she went to Penn.
Oh.
And they're going to be my advisors. And they are so flippin' freak out about ModPo. They've never even heard about it.
Wow.
And they love you guys and the Teacher Resource Center. They're going crazy now.
Oh, Shannon.
So I just
can I? What I'd like to do is have you stay on the phone and hear Joe and Dave just respond to what you've told us, and then we're gonna hang up so we can get to another poem or another caller. But I want, if it's okay with you, I want to contact Harriet and basically convey that story to her. I'm sure Harriet Mullen would be really gratified to hear that her poem was used in an application essay to Texas Women's University.
Right. And I can send you if you want. It's
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
What I wanted to say about dictionary before you hang up on me is that the issue of language in this poem made so much sense to me because of aphasia.
Sure, of course, especially that list poem.
And exactly. And so I wanted, if you talk to her, you tell her, I know she doesn't have a broke brain, but I totally understood where she's come from.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you can tell her I said thank you.
I will. The line that this makes me think of, there are two lines of Sleeping with the Dictionary, the title poem. Any exit from the logic of language might be an entry into a symptomatic dictionary. And then the next line. The alphabetical order of this ample block of knowledge might render a dense lexicon of lucid hallucinations. First of all, the phrase lucid hallucinations is fabulous as a poetic phrase, but also, I mean, it's lucid hallucinations, but also it has that aphasia quality that you're talking about. Is sometimes if you stare at the dictionary long enough, it all starts to shimmer like a mirage. Shannon, we love you so much and very proud.
Oh,
very
thanks.
proud. So
this will be weird. It's not science, so it's going to be weird for me. But
you're going to be great. Okay.
I'm going to do it.
So you hang up and listen to Dave and Joe respond, and then we'll take another caller and have a great day.
Okay, love you guys.
Okay,
Bye.
love you too. Wow. Bye. She's great. Joe, then Dave, any comments on Shannon?
Well, first off, congrats to Shannon. And listening to her talk, I mean, as a working poet, it's heartening to hear that someone who presumably is not a working poet has found such usefulness in poetry, that's become such a rich and crucial part of her life. So that's just very heartening to me.
Great. Thank you, Joe. Dave Poplar?
Also, congrats. I think that's great. That's amazing. Thinking about Sleeping with the Dictionary, too, we were talking about elitism. When we think about our politicians as being elite, we think that they're doing things behind the scenes that we don't have access to. And what we do when we feel that way, we request transparency. And I think that's what Sleeping with the Dictionary is doing. It's being as transparent as possible, laying it all on the line how it works. I mean, most poems, you used to use form to convey something. This is writing with form and writing about the whole experience, not just describing the experience, but it is the experience. And I think it's great to see that being that transparent can break it down for somebody who wasn't trained in poetry to use it in their experience and then go back to school. So I just think that's great. It comes full circle.
That's great. Thank you, Dave. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to turn off the POTS line, right? We're going to do, Anna, we're going to unplug it or whatever you do with the POTS line. Now nobody can call, right? It's like, think about how great that is, right? Nobody can call you. You unplug it and it's done. What I want to do is a kind of extended round of final words and allow some of the students to say a few things. I feel really good about this conversation we've had because it's been sort of partly a kind of celebration of generative poetry that makes you feel like you can write or read. And I think that's great. It's also true that we didn't get to a lot of our poems, but I think that's fine. We have the discussion forums for that. But I'll just repeat the list in case anyone in their final words want to say something about any of the poems. We didn't talk about Heginian's My Life. I know we could talk about that forever. Perelman's Chronic Meanings, which is a pre-elegy. Bernstein's 9/11 poem, In a Restless World Like This Is. We mentioned Susan Howe, but we didn't quote from it. Maybe you'll pull out a quote that's so great. We talked a little bit about Ron's Bart and Harriet's Sleeping with the Dictionary. So, but your final word needn't be about a poem. So I'm going to call people, get ready to have a final word. I'm going to call some people. And who's a student who's willing to also, here comes Jason, they're all looking down. Why don't you decide among yourselves which two of you want to do a final thought? They're still looking down. It doesn't have to be two of you. Okay, Gabe, what do you think? What are you thinking right now?
I'm thinking about a lot. I also am thinking about Jason's current pose, which is really funny to me.
You don't know how to do television because nobody actually can see that except for
but
you.
it has to be mentioned. Anyway, so the things I'm thinking about, one is related to Barbara's question. And to go back to that for a second, I'm thinking about with this idea that a lot of people have and share that poetry teaching can often be elitist, and she mentions this whole sort of idea that all culture, including poetry, is bourgeois. And so my issue here is that, like, when we teach a poem and we say that the teaching of that poem, say a difficult poem, is elitist, I think we're forgetting the material conditions in which a poem was made. And so we sometimes act or think about poetry as if it like grew from the soil of the university, but that poem comes from somewhere else. I mean, I remember like reading Grenier in class.
Robert Grenier.
Grenier, who's an amazing poet. I guess you could make the argument that that could be elitist because it's quite difficult, it's very strange.
It's in a box.
But like, this is a person who writes in a state of poverty and is a working class person, does not make money, and that's where that poem is written. And this person wrote that poem because he wanted to. It's not because I was going to learn it later. And so this is the conundrum I always get when we talk about Emily Dickinson in week one, where people are like, well, Emily Dickinson feels elitist. She's alone. She's writing for herself. Who is she leaving out? She's writing for herself. And so I have this kind of like crazy neurosis when it comes to these discussions because I feel very much that we're forgetting these poets are doing it for themselves. And for me, the language poets are the opposite of elitist because and they're the ones who get accused of it, I think, most often, because language poetry for me was the first time I read poetry and felt like I could do it or
Yes.
write it, and I am today, and so it feels like it had a pretty good result.
Yeah.
So that's my thought.
That's fantastic. I love that. Jason, you're having your own seminar here. Would you join the group? Okay. You're coaching her, I can tell. Okay. All right. Hi.
Hi.
What's your name?
I'm Elizabeth.
Did Jason bamboozle you into doing this?
Yeah. The school system, finding our own language and being able to independently interpret poetry or whatever we come into contact with. And most of the education system, at least the way I've been exposed to it, is mostly just like you have this block of information you have to memorize, and then there's a test at the end of the week, and there's no real value or given to just the act of experiencing language or learning things outside of this strict educational context. So.
Wow, Elizabeth, that's great. So you're saying that poetry can be an alternative to that kind of block rote.
Because it does provide freedom for interpretation. It's a
Right.
a collaboration
and encourages
between
you
author and
to find your own answers and solutions.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Snaps for Elizabeth. Okay. I'm going to call on people randomly. Anna Safford, what
Hey,
is your final thought? Jason is saying nice things about
yeah.
Elizabeth. You're such a good coach, Jason.
He is such a good coach. Yeah, I feel the same way as Gabe about this week, that there's something about this poetry that I think, for me, the same as I think what Gabe was saying, that this was the week where I felt like I could do this, or this like felt like something I could kind of tap into in my own way of sort of moving through the world. And I guess I find that really heartening. I had a great conversation in one of the threads last night with someone about my life. And just
Not your life, but Lynn Haginian's
But Lynn
life.
Haginian's my life, yeah, right, exactly. About that great poem, and I think that was one. That's for me. That's one of those like kind of foundational texts of like, oh my God, like why didn't I do this? Why didn't I think of this? So if you've made it this far, I mean, in ModPo, stick with it and strap in for week 8.
9.
Mine. Oh my God.
Week 9 is yeah.
Strap in. I mean,
So, Gabe, I just want to, Shannon Ratliff tweets, thank you, Gabe. I assume she's referring to your agreement to edit her papers at school. I assume that. What else should be? And there's like, what is that face, Lily?
Heart eyes.
Heart eyes, and then
Kissy
like a
heart.
Kissy heart. There's
There's
a tongue involved somehow.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I don't know.
Kids in the room now.
They're
Heart
like,
eyes,
oh,
kissy
Al,
heart."
you're such a square. Hey, Davey.
Oh.
We're squares together, though.
We are. Yeah, we are.
Up with squares.
Yeah, we're still waiting for the day where we totally match. We mostly match.
We're getting there.
We're getting close. Yeah.
I went to. I have to say, I went to the barber yesterday. You all noticed, and I said I want to look like Davey. The barber said, "You can never rock that."
Oh.
Davey's so square that he's cool.
Thanks, Al.
Do you have a final thought?
I do have a final thought, which is sort of an extension of Gabe's thought about thinking about the material conditions of writing a poem. And I've been thinking about the language poets this week through a Franco Harrison's from a statement on poetics he wrote in 1859 that I was reading earlier this week. And I'm going to read this sentence because I think it's useful.
Okay.
I am mainly preoccupied with the world as I experience it. And at times when I would rather be...
Davey, would you read it slower?
Yeah. I am mainly preoccupied with the world as I experience it. And at times when I would rather be dead, the thought that I could never write another poem so far has stopped me. And I think that that's helpful because thinking about the material conditions of writing a poem is also thinking about the poem as between the poet and something else. That you're writing a poem instead of doing something else, often instead of making money, instead of
always instead of making money.
yes,
Right, Ron?
instead of doing a certain kind of labor, of being at work, and instead of doing the shit you're supposed to be doing, you're writing a poem. But it's often the case that you're writing a poem instead of saying something mean, of hurting yourself, of figuring out what do I do with material conditions that suck, and a context that in which I'm not supposed to be a person. That, like, I think a lot of poets are in positions where, because of their embodiment or because of how they identify, they interact with information all the time. It's just like, please don't exist. And I think a poem is the thing that you do to be like, damn it, I'm going to exist. And that's something that's really important that's happening in these poems, and that's happening in Sleeping in the Dictionary, that it's not just like a fun experiment to see what you can do with language. It's like, damn it, I'm going to use this language because it's here for me to use, and I'm going to use it instead of not existing.
Totally brilliant.
Yeah.
Gabe and I are like wet-eyed. We're both crying. I'm looking at Gabe like,
but I'm like,
Gabe doesn't do it in front, in front of 1,000 people.
Davey.
That's so, can we just pause on that for a second?
Yes. Yeah.
That's so meaningful. It is so true. It is so true of so many poets. Not all, obviously, but.
And that's so true of so many people who are doing ModPo. That's something that we hear in the forums a lot, that like someone's had an accident, someone's working through depression, someone's working through something really serious. It's not like we read poetry because like our lives are rosy and awesome and art is great. It's like this is a real mode of making it through modes of refusal. And that's important about ModPo.
I think so. I mean, we're not into polls and surveys and things. If we were, we would see that disproportionate to the median population, there are more people who are, unemployed, disabled, marginal. How do you ever get that in a survey? You don't, and we wouldn't dare. But the kind of testimony that people give suggests that the community is functioning, and being a poet, but also being attracted to talking about this kind of poetry is what you say it is, Davey. So that's really heartening. I want to turn to Joe. Sorry, I didn't warn you, Joe, but I know you agree with what David just said, but you can say anything for your final thought.
Well, I love what everyone's had to say during this, especially the students and the studio audience. It's so impressive and beautiful. But I wanted to say that when I first met Ron Silliman, it was, I guess, like 1999 or 2000 or something. I was much younger, and I told him in all earnest, we were actually waiting in line to use the bathroom, and I told him that he reminds me of Darth Vader. And
Did you really, Joe?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, and Ron made some comment about he prefers Darth Maul or something. Anyway, but I said that because I always felt that the language poets, when I was young, when I was a poetry toddler, that they were out to destroy lyric poetry, that they were like the enemy. And Sid Corman was always pumping me up in that way, calling them the Lang Gang and everything. But once I started reading the stuff, and I found I had more in common with Ron's poetry and Ray's poetry.
Ray Armantrout,
than I did with some of the poets I was, really into at the time. But by reading the language poetry, it brought me into a better sense of the materiality of language. And really, the key for me, the possibilities of syntax. That's what I really got from language poetry. And it makes sense that in the ModPo syllabus, it goes from New York school, which is I do this, I do that, to language poetry, which is words do this, words do that. And it's just it's a natural movement.
That's great. I'm going to turn to Ron next. Your comment, Joe, reminds me of how difficult it's been between and among poetry communities, often about generations. There's been so much strife. I mean, given that there's so little territory to fight over, it's just one of those, academic battle, not in the sense of universities, but just academic in the sense of kind of pro forma. There's so much antagonism, and it's just great that you got in line for the bathroom and got to say that he was incarnate evil inside a mask with a deep voice, but it turned out that it was just Ron.
It is just Ron.
Anyway, thank you, Joe. Ron, do you want to have a final thought?
I'm giving a reading this weekend for anybody who's in Philadelphia, and I was looking at this poem called
You might as well plug it all the way, Ron, and say where the reading is.
It's at the old Bach Technical High School in a bookstore in room 936. It's 19th and South 9th Street.
South 9th, got it.
At 7 o'clock on Saturday. And one of the poems I'm planning to read the first 20 pages of is called Parrot Eyes Lust. And its very first lines are, I do this, I do that. And we go from there.
There we go. Thank you so much, Ron, for joining us. Dave Poplar, final thought?
Well, I've actually been reading a lot and studying complexity theory and complex adaptive systems, and I had an observation to make about that. But rather than that, I'll save that for my office hours. I just wanted to say props to the high school students. I thought what they said was extremely insightful. I was glad to be present for it, and it's not an easy thing to do, and I think it's great, and props.
Thank you, guys. Good job. Thank you. Erica, final thought?
I want to echo Dave's props to the students. You guys are amazing. And I also want to, as my final thought, to kind of return back to what Davey was saying, which I thought was amazing about making it through modes of refusal and language poetry, and really like the way that what can feel daunting is actually more open than other forms. And with that in mind, I want to encourage people to visit me in my office hours tomorrow at 10 in the morning and all next week. I know that next week is work that sometimes tends to scare people off, but it's work that has had huge impact on me and how I think about poetics. So talk to me.
Great. Thank you so much, Erica. Amber Rose, you got a final thought?
Yes, I do. I kind of have a lot of thoughts. What's my thought? Okay. My final thought is also to shout out the high school students. Also to say that Davey is brilliant and that I just am incredibly blessed to know you and have you as a friend.
You're brilliant too.
Yeah, we're gonna leave and we're gonna go talk about more poems and stuff, and I'm gonna have Davey all to myself. All right. Anyway, so yeah, shout out to the high school students. 11th grade is the same grade when I did poetry out loud, and it was when I first started caring about poems. So that's great that y'all are also in 11th grade. And the first poem that I recited in Poetry Out Loud was a Nikki Giovanni poem. And Nikki Giovanni is giving a free talk on Monday in Philadelphia at a public library on 19th and Vine Street. So go to that.
That's the public library.
Oh,
the free
public
the
library.
free library, yeah, the big one.
Yeah, capital THE public library. So yeah, go to that, 11th grade. The people on Facebook, come talk to me tomorrow about your questions. There's someone from Greece that wants to know if you would ever write a poem like Bart today, and I'm asking you that because they're from Greece, and I feel like their questions should be asked.
go to Athens, and there's definitely a Bart there.
There is in this other work called The Alphabet a section called Ketchak 2 in which there is a single sentence that maps totally the MARTA system from Atlanta. And what I was interested in there was that, well, I know the Bay Area intimately, having grown up there. In Atlanta, I only knew a few, Dr. King's church and 2 or 3 other things. So it was about looking out the window and not knowing what you see and what information you can get from that. So yeah, it's a project I could extend in other directions, but having sort of done that, I haven't in that sense done it. And I want to say I totally agree with the high school students. Yeah. So
okay, wait, I have to say one more thing.
That's all right. Go ahead.
Tomorrow, My office hours are 10:45 to 11:45, and I will probably be hanging out with the introduction that Al wrote to this week, where he kind of loosely gives us 16 points to think about for language poetry.
In 51 minutes.
In 51 minutes. So if you want to return to that introduction and think about some of the structures of language poetry, come hang out and work through it with me tomorrow.
That's really cool. Sounds very productive. So Jason needs to go next, then Eric, then Lily, and then I will conclude. Jason.
Okay, I'll be very quick. I just want to say to the high school students that from this class, having this experience with poetry, do everything you can to learn as many words as possible and find out what you can. Yeah, sleeping with it. If you just like look up every word and sleeping with a dictionary, you'll learn a good lexicon. But find out what like. Don't let anyone predetermine what it is you are going to say. Like, language is yours too. You don't have to write poetry, but you have to say what you alone can say. And I want to say to Ron, who I was also terrified of for 10 years, because I worked at a...
This is like an encounter session.
It is an encounter session. I wanted to talk privately with Ron in the future about that.
In front of thousands of people.
Yes, but I don't feel that way whatsoever anymore. And I want to just... I will go in the forums and pose a question which has to do with the titles of the two poems that we're dealing with, which are, in a way, like Albany is a particular kind of word that's different from the other words in Albany. And it throws an anchor kind of into the earth or into a place or a place that is pointed to by a particular word. And I'm really interested in the work that the title does in both BART and in Albany on like helpfully containing the language that follows and giving the reader a dart on a map.
I do think of Ron, among the other things you said, I do think of Ron as ultimately a poet of place in the largest sense of place. Can you bring the mic back to Eric? And I know you have to go teach. And then Lily and Al will end. That's me. Eric,
so,
hi.
Vietnam and the political world puts a huge force behind certain kinds of language and a pressure, and that pressure is one of the driving forces against which, in reaction to language poetry, forms itself. I want to quote a wonderful, great poet who's not in ModPo about other kinds of history and other words which are not spoken. In my experience, most history is unwritten, particularly the history about blacks in America, and its traduction is a continuous minefield of delusion and denial, from slavery to the African slave trade to Reconstruction and the compromises inherent in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. So as an American writer, you had better have your own sense of history if you are going to be rooted in any kind of truth as you see it. Michael S. Harper.
Michael Harper. Thank you so much for that. Lily, final thought?
Yeah, two quick things. One, just like thought that Joe's anecdote about meeting Ron in line for the bathroom was really funny because for the viewers at home, sitting up here for like an hour and a half and like a full day of drinking a ton of coffee to stay awake and alert and like a ton of water to try and like not pass out and stay hydrated is very challenging. So that's the context I'm working from currently.
Wow. I
And-
thought you were going somewhere else with that, but
No,
whatever.
I just wanted to, just state that I thought that was very funny.
You could leave the table anytime.
Well,
Maybe you are a little trapped. Okay.
So that's one thing. But a second thing is just like interested in like continuing to think about this idea about elitism, because like I really agree with what Amber Rose said. Like we can say whatever we want, and like ultimately there just is an elitism to the ability to take the time and study, to like be at Penn. Like we're at Penn, we have to acknowledge that, right? So like I think one thing I think about elitism as a what makes it pejorative is that there's this concept that when you're elite, you like can be closed off and you don't have to listen to anyone else. Like you get to be the pinnacle of whatever the thing is that you're elite at. So like just a great thing to do to respond to continue to assert, like as Davia and Gabe were saying, that the underpinning to this act of writing poetry is not elite, is just figure out where the poets in your area are reading and go out and read and be present. Or if there isn't really a reading community, like find a few friends and just make your own, like just this act of like go witness poetry like happening in front of you and like just be open to listening to it. And that's and creating it yourself if you want to. So that's my plug.
Great. And just to add on to that, there's a ModPo person named Curtis who's been asking for advice about how to organize a meetup, and that whole discussion is available. And various people who've organized meetups, including Molly, have described the best way to do it. And generally, these just happen spontaneously, usually in dense population areas, but not only. So I think as an add-on to what Lily just suggested, or actually she did suggest this specifically, if there aren't a lot of readings, then organize your own meetup. There's an island off the coast of Seattle called Shaw Island, and during the summer after the first year of ModPo, so that would be the summer of 2013, the people of Shaw Island, a bunch of them had taken ModPo, they organized a reading group, and the following year they did ModPo together. Okay, the number of people on Shaw Island compared with the number of people who did this ModPo thing on Shaw Island was 25%. That is 25% of the population of Shaw Island met weekly to do ModPo together. Isn't that great? And then they did an anthology and they sent it to me, and it turns out that Lainey Brown spends part of her summer out there and always goes to Shaw Island to hang out with the Shaw Island ModPo people. And that is how Lainey Brown found out about ModPo, not here at the University of Pennsylvania. All right, I have just a shout out to Marcus Balassi, who's a poet that we met in London, who's been struggling trying to find readership and a community. Remember Marcus, Anna? And he just writes in response to Davy, damn it, I'm going to exist. So heartening to a lot of people. Nicole Braun has written something. I just want to conclude by reading it. It's in this forever Are We Too Nice thread that I've read from several times. It's a little agonizing for me to read that sometimes. There's a lot of self-consciousness about are we being too nice? Are we not nice enough? But this is a particularly wonderful response by Nicole Braun, and I'll read part of it. I have to say that my initial experience with ModPo was a sense of relief. When I went to graduate school many years ago, I had a dream that the university was nice, quote unquote, before I went, meaning supportive, engaged in the ideas, working on social change. I experienced a huge culture shock at how mean-spirited the corporate academy was, and it sent me reeling. I know a lot of this had to do with my class position, but I found the culture of academia more horrific than any working-class situation I had been in Flint, Michigan, which is saying something. So I am extremely grateful for the nurturing community that exists here. It is what I thought learning should be. I was wondering for a while why the atmosphere was generally so great, and came to the stereotypical conclusion that many of us identify with being outsiders and are probably more aware and sensitive. Perhaps this is incorrect. I agree that learning and art should also be disruptive and challenging. However, there is no reason that this cannot also coexist with a sense of shared humanity and community and kindness. I, for one, am much more apt to grow in these kinds of conditions than a place where mean-spiritedness is the order of the day. So thank you to everybody who's participating in this self-conscious question about how we challenge and are still kind and respectful to each other. And thank you for everybody who's involved with the whole ModPo project. And thanks to my gang, the people from Lower Moreland. Hey, good job, you guys. And Annie, Eric, Anna, Gabe, Davey, Lily, Amber Rose, Ron. I don't know who's left in the Hangouts, but we were lucky to have Erica, Dave, and Joe. That was great. And also to Zach and Chris, who never get enough thanks, because holy cow, what they do, it's really not easy. So week 9 is next week. Office hours all over the place. Please help us help you through week 9. It really is worth trying week 9. So let's do it, and we'll see you soon. Signing off from the Writer's House.